America, we got to get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us. Hey, welcome everyone. This Thursday, thoughts and prayers at the outset for all the victims in that horrible crash last night at Reagan Airport in DC. The military crew that was on that military helicopter and all the civilians on that airplane. No survivors. They're all victims. Our thoughts and our prayers and our thanks to all the first responders. My guest today is a guy I've known a long, long time. John Ziegler, long-time conservative, long-time principled conservative, long-time back in the day conservative radio talk show host. He's now got a podcast, Death of Journalism podcast. Check it out, Death of Journalism podcast. Follow John on Twitter at Zigfreud, Zigfreud, at Zigfreud. John, welcome, my friend. And I call everybody my friend.
I know you do. By the way, my Twitter handle is Zigmanfreud, Zigmanfreud. It's a terrible college nickname. And ironically, when I picked Sigmund Freud, that was back in like 2011. I did not think that Twitter was going to be nearly as big a deal as it has turned out to be. So I regret that handle almost every day. But that's the proper handle.
But thanks for correcting. Sigmund Freud, Zigman Freud. Everybody knows my history. I think I know this, but my audience. I voted for Trump in 2016, and then I kind of woke up. Were you kind of opposed to him out of the gate? Remind me.
I was probably as never Trump as any conservative possibly could be in 2015 to 2016. Although as a senior columnist for Mediaite at the time, I think I was ahead of the curve in predicting that he would win the Republican nomination. I was immediately very concerned that he would win the nomination. I was less confident he was going to win the general election against Hillary. I thought, like most people did, that Hillary would win. However, I think this is an important data point for our discussion here.
Yeah.
This is how never Trump I was. I actually went on Glenn Beck's. Think about this happening today, Joe. I went on Glenn Beck's radio show just before the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And with his blessing, because I had written a column about this for Mediaite, I had urged Republicans, conservatives in swing states to vote for Hillary Clinton because I knew there was a chance that Trump could win. I didn't think he would, but there was certainly a chance that he could win. And I just didn't think it was worth everything was going to happen after.
Where was Glenn Beck at that time on Trump? He was
as anti-Trump as anybody. I mean, the idea that he would even, he and I don't even talk anymore. He and I used to be pretty decent friends, and I would come on his show fairly regularly. And it's just incredible to think that, in late 2016, he was having me on his show to make this argument, which I'm sure to most Republicans seems ludicrous in retrospect,
right.
But I stand by it to this day that if Hillary had won, I actually think the conservative movement would be in better shape today than it currently is.
So you, again, to your credit, you were opposed to him from the jump.
Right.
What was your biggest, most immediate reason for opposing him? Why did you oppose him?
Well, I didn't.
As a conservative.
I didn't think that he was a conservative. I didn't think that he was intellectually and emotionally fit for the office.
Yeah.
My father had an extensive dealing with Trump back in the late 80s, early 90s in the real estate world. My father was in banking, and my father had met with him several times to get some financing for Trump on some key projects, and he knew that Trump was a complete fraud and basically someone who could not be trusted. And then, frankly, Joe, I think this is it's amazing to me that this never gets talked about. But the final nail for me when it came to Trump being a theoretical president was watching The Apprentice on a regular basis. My wife and I used to watch The Apprentice constantly, and I didn't even think he was fit to be the host of a reality show. I mean, his thinking in the boardroom of that show was so infantile and so ludicrous and so lacking in principle or logic.
Yeah.
That I thought, this is not a guy who should be president of the United States. Now, interestingly, and this may shock you, but I mean, I have never voted for Donald Trump at any level. I never voted for him in a primary. I never voted for him in a general. However, and I think this is new information to you. I'm 99% sure this is new information to you. I did consult for a pro-Trump super PAC during the 2024 election because while my opinion of Trump had not changed, my view of the opposition had changed. And the idea that Kamala Harris was going to be president of the United States for potentially 8 years was an abhorrent concept to me. So a friend asked me, who was running the Trump super PAC, whether I would consult, and I did consult, but I did not vote for Donald Trump. I never have.
And you did not vote for Kamala Harris.
I did not vote for Kamala Harris.
So I think, John, this is instructive, and this is a great intro to our conversation, because back in that day, you and I were more closely aligned. But this is really interesting. You were a principled opposition to him from the beginning. I voted for him and supported him in 2016. Ben Shapiro and back a lot of the right-wing conservative talk radio folk, they opposed him. Damn near all of them over the last 8 years have moved the other way. I moved clearly away from him. I don't know of any other real MAGA conservative who did. But you and I generally agree on Trump, but yet you've got a beef with me and others in the NeverTrumper movement. Let's get into that.
Okay.
Because
sure.
I want my audience to know, because I think this is an important conversation. When I asked you to come on, you said, maybe, Joe, I'd love to, but you know what? This isn't going to be easy on you. So I want to get into that. Let's explore what that is.
Well, okay. Some more history
think, oh my God, you guys sound the same.
Okay. So more history as context. And I'm not sure.
Yeah.
In my experience, when I go through history, it's amazing to me how oftentimes people I know don't have any real memory of what actually happened. Maybe I have a better memory than most people, but on this kind of stuff, I remember everything. And so after Trump was elected, the so-called Never Trump movement had these meetings, I think every other Tuesday or Thursday, whatever it was, in Washington, D.C., that Bill Kristol, I guess, was involved in, called the Meeting for the Concerned or something like that.
Okay.
And I would participate in those meetings via Zoom because I'm here in Los Angeles area, and this was happening in Washington, D.C. And I thought the Never Trump conservative movement was principled based. In other words, it doesn't matter that what we're going to suffer here because clearly the Republican Party has moved on. And if you're not pro-Trump, you have no career. But I'm not money motivated. I'm not career motivated. I'm about what's right and wrong. And I'm willing to stand on principle. And how can we fight Trump principally? And how can we salvage some semblance of the conservative movement and the Republican Party for what happens after Trump? That was my vision of this. And after a few meetings where I barely ever even participated, I realized these people were crazy. And,
Why?
Well, they had all sorts of nutty ideas about, how they were going to get rid of Trump that were unrealistic. And at that point, I still thought it was at least somewhat principle-based, but it was delusional.
Okay.
So I basically left the meetings and didn't think much of it. And then as we go to the 2020 election, you, of course, decide you're going to run against Trump in the primaries. And you contacted me to tell me that you were leaving your radio show.
Well,
and you were going to.
It was leaving me, yeah.
Right. Well, that's part of the equation here. You made it very clear that what was happening was there's no audience. And I knew this firsthand because I had the same experience in talk radio. There's no audience for a Never Trump conservative. It doesn't exist. So you were losing your radio show, and then you were going to use the loss of your radio show as an act of principle that you were going to stand up against Trump as a former congressman and run against him in the primary. And I was supportive of that from the conservative perspective. You and I met with your campaign manager in Beverly Hills for breakfast. And, I thought we even talked about me working with you on the campaign. I thought this was a situation that had no chance of succeeding. But if it's a stand on principle, then I'm all for it, because I think that from a historical perspective, it was important that somebody stand up against Trump in the 2020 election. And so I was okay with that. I mean, I felt like you were taking advantage of a bad situation, but heck, that's life. I mean, I'm a realist. That's life. But that context is important, Joe, for how I've interpreted where you've gone since. And by the way, it's not just you, it's the entire so-called Never Trump conservative movement. Bill Kristol, Rick.
Can I stop? Let me, and I'm going to cut you off mid-thought and hold that thought for a moment. And let's drill down on this. I publicly turned against Trump in 2018. Helsinki was my final straw. And so from that moment on, I pretty much took a blowtorch to my career, as you had prior to me. And I always revered you for that. I didn't run against Trump to try to take advantage of a bad situation. I ran against Trump because, like you, I thought some principled conservatives should run against him. I still had my radio show, but the minute I announced as a candidate, they let me go. But I wasn't trying to take advantage of anything. Somebody needs to challenge him. I was hoping Mitt Romney or John Kasich or somebody would.
Joe, I have no doubt, giving you the benefit of the doubt, that was part of the equation. But part of the equation was very clearly that running against Trump was a career move because the radio show was going away regardless, and that therefore you were going to increase your notoriety and you were going to have a place in the media landscape as the conservative who stood up against Trump, which, by the way, in theory is a good place to be from a media perspective.
I'll add
Do you acknowledge that, Joe? Do you acknowledge
let me add a nuance. It was a principled move, as it would have been if you did it. But there's no doubt in the back of my mind, I thought, okay, how's this going to impact me career-wise? Maybe it'll help. I don't know. But help leading the charge. Go ahead.
You and I have a different memory of our conversations around that, because you were very open about the reality of the radio show and what you hoped to gain out of running against Trump. I do not deny that there was a principle element to it, at least in what we discussed, but there was also a career element. And because there was a career element, where you went next, and that's consistent with the Bill Kristols of the world, the Rick Wilsons of the world, the Steve Schmitz of the world, who I think is probably the worst of all of the so-called Never Trump. He's not even a conservative. I think he's just an asshole. But I mean, of all the people that are in that group, I am not much more suspicious of intent, because I know all these people and I know you and I know how you got into that race in 2020 against Trump, if you even want to call it a race, because it went nowhere. I mean, you didn't even get the votes counted in Iowa, which I felt badly for you, because there was no vote counting that night. And so it didn't gain any traction in the conservative media or anywhere else. And then where you went from there,
where'd I go?
Was you were no longer a Never Trump conservative. You were a Never Trump liberal, because you were trying and needing to appeal to liberals, both in the media at MSNBC and CNN, to book you on television, and online, because there was no conservative audience that was willing or interested in following a never Trump conservative. And you
John,
you're a smart guy. You saw the handwriting on the wall. And so you completely gave up all your principle, almost all your principles.
That's John. That's interesting. Thanks. That clears up a lot. Couple things. When that hopeless presidential challenge ended, I remember going on CNN and I was asked, "Okay, Joe, are you going to support Trump in the general election?" And I said, "I'm going to support whoever the Democratic nominee is. Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, doesn't matter to me." That was, in my mind, a principled move, because why am I, and respond to this, why am I a never Trumper? Because I believe he, like you, he's not a conservative, he's an authoritarian. I believe he's a fucking existential threat to our democracy. I'm not going to speak for any other never Trumper, John. I believe that. So I will support whoever is running against him, because I believe he's an existential threat to democracy. I'm not, you may disagree with that. And that's
Joe,
why
I have no doubt. I have no doubt that you believe that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. However,
yes,
there are all sorts of ways to express that concern that aren't going to get you on MSNBC and CNN, and aren't going to have you do a countrywide tour for Kamala Harris. I don't remember what was that called. Was
Republicans for Harris?
Grifters for Harris, or was
Stop,
it eunuchs for Kamala?
But
Grifters for Harris, or eunuchs for Kamala. I can't remember what the name of the group you were part of.
It was Republicans for Harris. But
no, it was eunuchs for Kamala, I think.
Well, stop with that. But now, John, again, if you believe, as I do, and just respond to this, that he is an existential threat to our democracy, then I will support the only candidate who can keep him out of the White House. In 2020, that was Joe Biden. In 2024, that was Kamala Harris. That doesn't mean I'm a liberal. I'm just trying to keep that existential threat out of the White House.
All right. First of all,
but you took that
many, Joe, in order to placate your liberal audience, which I include the bookers at CNN and MSNBC, you've taken numerous liberal positions.
On what?
First of all, the entire Never Trump conservative movement completely humiliated itself during COVID. The COVID thing exposed all of you guys as a bunch of frickin' frauds, because you saw COVID as this perfect opportunity to try to go after and take down Trump. And every single liberal in your audience was a mask-wearing, mask mandate, vaccine mandate person that you needed to placate. So you became part. And this is one of many examples. The Lawfare is another great example. I mean, Joe, do you really believe E. Jean Carroll was telling the truth? Do you really believe E. Jean Carroll was telling the truth, Joe?
Hey, John, can I respond to COVID first? Then can we get to that? This is why I love you, because you're going to throw 30 golf balls at me. Let me catch one of them. COVID. My stance on COVID was I didn't support any fucking mandates.
I doubt that, Joe.
I didn't support, John. The truth matters. I never supported mandates. To me, it was all about freedom. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you own a business and you want people to be vaccinated to come into your business, do it. I don't want the government to mandate it. We're all in this together. I encouraged people to do the right thing, but I was always opposed of mandates. Again, I won't speak to any other never Trumpers. And as far as lawfare goes, here's my thing. He committed crimes, I believe, trying to overthrow an election. I think we had an obligation to investigate that. He committed crimes trying to obstruct the search for classified documents. I think we had an obligation to investigate that shit. Don't you?
I have no problem with investigation, and I think
that's not lawfare.
But my question to you was, and I have several, do you believe E. Jean Carroll was telling the truth? Do you believe that she was raped by Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay, see, they're right there. That is an absurd position for someone who is allegedly a conservative, because there's zero chance that E. Jean Carroll was telling the truth. Just like there was zero chance that Christine Blasey Ford was telling the truth against Brett Kavanaugh. Now, you weren't yet part of the liberal anti-Trump so-called Republican movement at that point because you were still going to run for president. But that was the first moment when I knew that NeverTrumpers were full of shit. Because they all let me finish. They all supported Christine Blasey Ford, and Christine Blasey Ford was a liar. Brett Kavanaugh had never even met Christine Blasey Ford. And so that was even before COVID. That exposed to me what the so-called Never Trump conservative movement was really all about. It was about grifting and doing a minstrel show for liberals.
Okay, and I'm glad you phrased it that way, because that's the crux of it. All of us Never Trumpers are really liberals, and we're trying to get on CNN and MSNBC and all that.
That's a large part of it. Yes.
Are there any Never Trumpers in your mind who aren't liberals?
Unfortunately, other than me, I'm desperately searching for someone.
You're the only one. I mean,
there might be others, but I'm not aware of too many.
Does it worry you that you paint with that big old broad brush like all of us Never Trumpers, except for you, are libs? All of us?
It's not a broad brush. I'm going by many years of data. I've been desperately trying to find another Never Trump conservative who's actually still a conservative and didn't turn into a liberal to try to get on MSNBC and CNN.
Well, and John, just again, for the record, I'm sure others get paid to get on MSNBC or CNN. I've never gotten paid a dime by anybody.
Would you take payment if they gave it to you, Joe?
No.
Oh, sure. Okay.
No, I have never been and don't want to be a paid contributor for any media I do. Never have. Okay. And John, I know you know this, like, you haven't enriched yourself taking the principled stand you've taken over the years against Trump. This has not been enriching for me, being a Never Trumper. You'd acknowledge that it would be much easier for the both of us if we were pro-Trump conservatives these last 8 years.
Oh, that's obvious. That's obvious. But that, because you may have made a miscalculation on the best way to grift, doesn't mean it's not grifting.
Is every Never Trumper except for you a grifter?
That's not the definition. I am more than, if someone wants to show me evidence that they are a principled conservative person who opposes Trump, then I'm more than happy to have someone else join this group that can have their meetings in a phone booth if phone booths still existed. But the reality is nobody else cares, apparently, more about principle than about grifting.
John, in your mind, what you believe I'm a lib and you believe Bill Kristol?
No, I don't. Joe, I know you're not a lib. That's what's so frustrating. Okay. You are clearly a conservative, but you are molding your beliefs to not offend liberals that you consider to be your core audience now.
Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting nuance. So you still believe I'm a conservative? You don't doubt
because I knew you before the transformation.
And if you and I, John, went through every single fucking public policy issue, and you asked me where I stood on all these issues, I generally would take still all the conservative positions. We won't go through that exercise, but stop there. I believe I'm still a conservative. I think you believe that. You think, though, I've kind of put those principles on the shelf to pursue something.
Look, it is my view, because of how I know the way the media works and the Never Trump conservative movement works. And I'm not placing you in the same group as all these other people, but consistent with the people I've mentioned in this group, you have publicly taken positions that I don't really believe that you truly are believing in, because, or more often, you have censored your true beliefs because you don't want to offend your liberal audience. Again, that audience being bookers at liberal media outlets and whoever it is may be following your podcast or your social media platforms.
So what would be helpful, John Ziegler, is for you to give me examples of that. And again, COVID,
I already did. You don't really believe E.G. Carroll told the truth. You don't believe that, Joe. I don't believe you believe that. But that became an article of faith for liberals. So therefore, you pretend that somehow E. Jean Carroll told the truth about Donald Trump.
To me, and again, in the broad scheme of things, when it comes to healthcare reform and the border and abortion and guns and how is Eugene Carroll telling the truth? To me, that's not in the top 100.
No, because you don't want to talk about it, because you know you're wrong. You know you're lying about that. You don't believe her.
Hold on. Let me answer. I don't think that's a policy issue that determines whether one is conservative or not. But to that issue, yes, I believe her. Donald Trump has a history of abusing and sexually assaulting and harassing women. So yes,
so therefore, anybody that makes a claim, no matter how ridiculous it is telling the truth.
I believe her. Yes.
Why do you believe her, Joe?
I believe her.
On what basis do you believe her?
John, again, I don't want to go back because I'd have to go back.
Because you don't want to talk about this because she is a fraud.
Okay, but
you decided to take the side of a fraud. By the way, and this is not an insignificant issue, because we're in the middle of a massive debate in this country about what sexual harassment is and Me Too. And if you accept that E. Jean Carroll is telling the truth, that says an awful lot about your worldview. And to me, at best, it means you're a moron. But I don't think you're a moron, Joe. I think you decided, you know what? I can't side with Trump on this because I will be looked at in a negative light by my audience.
I'm happy to go on your podcast and devote a show to the E. Jean Carroll case. And we could do that, and because I'd have to refresh my memory, John, because I ain't really thought about it much at all.
Let me ask you this: do you believe that Trump should have been convicted in the New York City case? No. Do you think the convictions against Trump were legitimate?
The New York City case, no, that was bullshit. I wish the other ones, yes. That one I think was bullshit.
So you believe that his convictions are not legitimate? You've never called him a convicted felon.
Oh, no, stop. I don't think those ever should have been brought against him.
Have you ever called him a convicted felon?
Yes, because he is a convicted felon. I opposed the case being brought. Once it was brought and he had a trial, jury as peers, and they convicted him, he's a convicted felon. So yes,
do you believe that was a legitimate case? Do you believe that that case should have been brought, and that do you believe that he was guilty?
I just answered that I don't think it should have been brought, but it was, and he was convicted.
Hold on a second. This is really interesting. So the people that you side with, you acknowledged, used lawfare to get an illegitimate felony conviction against a presidential candidate for the Republican Party. And you're concerned about what Trump is going to do to democracy? What about what that does to democracy, Joe? That is massive hypocrisy right there. Your people, your side, used the law for an illegitimate conviction of a presidential candidate, and you think that somehow that's not a threat to democracy?
John, I said I wish they hadn't brought that case against him. There were grounds to bring that case against him. I wish they hadn't. The only case I wanted brought against him was he tried to overthrow an American election. And I have spent 99.9% of my time talking about that, talking about the Georgia case, talking about the classified docs case, because those are much bigger, more important indictments. That's all I spent my time talking.
It's not important that he became a convicted felon technically because of a bullshit case that you believe was a bullshit case. By the way, how amazing is it?
It helped him politically. I knew it would, and you knew it would.
But that was not the intent. The intent was exactly the opposite. The intent was not to help him politically.
Well, John, I thought it was a mistake. I thought it was a mistake politically.
But was it a threat to democracy, Joe? Was it a threat to democracy? Was bringing that illegitimate case against the Republican presidential candidate a threat to democracy?
No, John, because there were grounds to bring the case. He committed business fraud. Michael Cohen was basically jailed for the same damn thing, the guy who worked for him. So there were grounds. Politically, I wish they hadn't done it because there were much bigger fish to fry.
So it was not a threat to democracy to bring a case you acknowledge to be bullshit against the Republican presidential candidate that resulted in him being convicted. By the way, has it never occurred to you to be odd that not one of those jurors has ever done a news media interview? Do you find that odd, Joe?
No,
I find that unbelievable. I find that to be the most unbelievable thing that did not happen in 2024 that no one talked about. That not one juror did an interview from that case. Not one. Not one.
John.
You know why? Because they were all anti-Trump crazy people.
Let me ask you this,
and no
John.
one wants to expose that.
John, the case was brought. He had a trial. He was convicted.
By a jury of liberals.
Okay. So then you question the process. So because it was held in New York City.
Yeah, of course I do. And the fact that not one of them did an interview.
His crimes were committed in New York City.
Joe, if you used your conservative brain, which you're a very smart guy, and if you weren't in the tank for this anti-Trump movement, and you looked at this objectively, the fact that not one of those jurors did even one interview would make you go, New York City jury, and not one of them did an interview. Gee, I wonder if they were concerned about exposing their political bias or not. That's unheard of in major trials in America in the modern era. Not one juror did an interview.
John,
the case was a fraud.
John, the other cases against Trump.
I would have liked to have seen not the classified. I think the classified documents case was flawed. But I think the so-called insurrection case, I would have liked to have seen it go forward because I think there were some serious concerns about what Trump did during that time period that I agree with you about.
You don't consider that lawfare, the Jan 6 case. You don't consider lawfare.
No, here's the part of it that I don't like. Why did it take so long to bring the case?
Oh, great.
The case seemed timed to disrupt his presidential campaign as opposed to just doing justice.
But he did a great job delaying it too. The Trump team did.
I understand that. I'm not even alleging a conspiracy. I'm saying that from a perception standpoint, it was idiotic not to have that case brought a lot sooner than it.
But that one you consider those are indictments that should have been pursued,
adjudicated. I would have liked to have seen them adjudicated.
The Georgia case when he called.
How do you feel about Fani Willis, Joe?
Irrelevant to me.
It's totally relevant.
No, John.
If you were a real conservative, you would criticize Fani Willis for being a total fraud.
As a real conservative, and I know you are too, and I'll never question that, I'm more bothered that the president of the United States got on the phone and pressured the Secretary of State of Georgia to find him 11,470 votes. I find that.
By the way, Joe, I agree that was his intent, but that's not what he said.
That's exactly what he said. No, it's
not what he said.
What did he say, John?
He was actually either by accident or for Trump. He was using some decent judgment where he did not tell them to find those votes. He said I can't remember the exact quote, but he made it clear.
He said, I need.
You know what his intent was. He didn't say you need. He said I need. That's important.
Are you bothered that he made that call?
Yes, that's it. That was an absolutely absurd, idiotic,
potentially unlawful.
Totally unlawful. It was a completely absurd thing for the president of the United States to do. Completely absurd.
Right. And the taking of classified documents and then potentially lying about it and obstructing the retrieval of, I think those were charges worth adjudicating. Yes or no?
I feel less passionately about the classified documents situation, especially when Joe Biden was not fully investigated or charged for this almost the same thing. So, to me, if I'm going to lay down a line, I think the significant issues deal with January 6th. January 6th is a significant issue with regard to our democracy. And I am very concerned by some of the things that Trump did in an effort to, as you would say, overturn the election. I'm not sure that that's how I would phrase it, but there were things that should have been adjudicated related to Trump's behavior there. And I think it's unfortunate that'll never happen. John,
I've said this now 6 or 7 times in our chat, and I really appreciate you coming on. Tell me if you agree with me. I believe he's an existential threat to our democracy. Do you believe that? Do you believe that?
I'm not as in agreement with that as I once was, and here's why. Because he was already president of the United States for 4 years, Joe, and we survived it. And And he left. He didn't leave the way he should have. He left like a crybaby, not even going to the inauguration. But he did leave. And so therefore it's harder for me to accept the existential threat to democracy argument when he was already president for 4 years and nothing really all that horrible happened. So how are you going to argue that the second time is going to be worse now that we're very much aware of who he is and we have January 6th in the history and we're much more on guard regarding who he is, and he's termed out at the end of this 4 years in office.
Well,
so why would he be more of a threat now than he was then? And he didn't do anything to destroy democracy.
Well, John Ziegler, I know he's termed out, but again, there's always been a lack of imagination with what Trump might try to do. So who knows what he might try to do, but I don't want to get into that. But okay, I get it. You're not as existential threat to democracy kind of a guy as I am. Fine. What I want to get at, John, is...
By the way, before you move on, I actually think the bigger threat is that he has turned the Republican Party into a complete monarchy, and that the Republican Party is going to have Trump family members running it well beyond when I'm dead, in all likelihood. I mean, that to me is, in the long term, that is a threat to our democracy.
Agreed. And he's turned the party into an authoritarian, embracing whatever. That authoritarianism is a threat to democracy. But that issue aside, you and I are not in the same boat on that, but we're not that far apart.
I agree.
But I want to get understanding on this, in that because that's how I feel, I will always support the only candidate who can beat him. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, doesn't matter to me. You may disagree with that. Let me finish and then jump on me. You may disagree with that. I just want you to know what forms my support did of Biden and or Harris, because I believe this guy's a threat. I got to support the Democrat. And I do that, John, still being off the charts pro-gun, off the charts pro-Israel, off the charts pro-free speech, off the charts anti-tax, limited government, everything else that's always made me conservative. I still have all of those policy beliefs. I just got to keep him out of the White House to save the democracy. That's all. Like, that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so let's go through what happened and why I disagree with you on the 2024 election. So your whole argument is save democracy.
But John, can I ask you this before you go down that road? Can I just ask you yes or no if you agree with this? Can you be? This is actually an interesting question. Even if you can you be a principled conservative who votes for Kamala Harris because you believe he's a threat to democracy? Can you be a principled conservative?
Difficult, and the reason why I think it's very difficult, and where I was going before.
Go ahead.
You jumped in there is the whole idea that democracy, and my retort to that is I became much more radicalized about the Democratic Party because of COVID, and living here in California probably played a major role in that. But Joe, I have two young daughters. 12 and 7 years old, so for 4, do the math, 4 years ago, they were in very young ages, and they were just starting to go to school. And for over a year, a tyrant in California by the name of Gavin Newsom prevented my children from having any legitimate schooling, required masks uselessly for when they went back to school, threatened to mandate a vaccine for children to go to school before he realized he couldn't get away with that. And the entire Democratic Party that you support was at best silent about this and was overtly supportive of what he and other blue state governors did. That changed my opinion of what I was dealing with the Democratic Party in a very significant way.
Fair, and I appreciate that. And I watched you then, and you were very outspoken and consistent. All I'm saying is, John, I agree with you. I don't think you followed me during COVID like I followed you, but I was on the same.
I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt on that, Joe. But the point,
I was never.
You're not seeing.
I get your point. I get your point, And a lot of blue governors became tyrants. I would argue with you. A lot of red governors became tyrants, and I would argue with you. Trump acted like a tyrant. I think.
I hate what Trump did during COVID.
Agreed.
So
all I'm saying is you're accusing me of not being a conservative. I agree with everything you're saying about COVID.
I'm building the context. I'm building the context for the 2024 decision. So because of what I learned about the Democratic Party during COVID, that changed my view of what the threat is. It also changed my view of how credible this idea is that we're the Save Democracy Party when Gavin Newsom declared himself to be a king, literally, for 2 years and in a state of emergency with powers to do whatever the hell he wanted to and acted on them. And every member of the Democratic Party sat by and go, gee, isn't that awesome? So the idea that you're going to try to claim that we're opposing Trump in 2024 because we're the party trying to save democracy is inherently suspect. But then when you oust Joe Biden after the first debate, and then you insert Kamala Harris without one damn vote, not one vote, this is how you're going to save democracy. We're going to go with a person who's never received one vote in a primary system, not even going to have an open convention. This is the Save Democracy Party, Joe?
Take a breath, John. And by the way, again, this is helpful. Thank you. So at this point in time, or maybe a year ago, when we talk about a threat to democracy, did you believe then and now, whatever, that the Democratic Party is an equal threat? Like, is that where you got to?
I think that they were at least equal threats, and they're way worse on some of the core issues facing the country than what Trump pretends to be, or at least the people around Trump were. And J.D. Vance seems to be at least a guy that I can trust what he really believes in. And so I didn't vote for Trump, but I didn't want Kamala Harris to be president. And I didn't buy the democracy argument for the reasons I just stated. One, because of COVID. Two, because of the coup against Biden, and then the switcheroo. I mean, the idea that you guys tried to claim to be the party of democracy after what you pulled with Kamala Harris is absolutely asinine.
John, I love you, brother, but don't say you guys. Don't put us all in a bucket.
Joe, you went around the country doing those events, eunuchs for Kamala. You did eunuchs for Kamala around the whole country.
Again, technically, just to be clear, I think the sign's behind my shoulder. It doesn't say eunuchs. It's a fun thing to say, but I was part of Republicans for Harris, not eunuchs for Harris. Okay. But again, you and I, John, just, and this is okay. You and I have a fundamental difference because I do consider Trump a threat to democracy. I think the Democrats are fucked up on a lot of issues, right? But I would argue, again, not to revisit COVID, during COVID, I think both parties almost equally screwed up. But John,
let me hold on. This is an important point. This is an important point because this is another issue of hypocrisy among Never Trump conservatives. In a moment when I realized that you guys were mostly full of shit, that is,
you go again.
Hold on a second. Hold on. This is important. You mentioned Trump and Republicans during COVID. I hated Trump during COVID, but you know who I didn't hate during COVID? Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis provided a viable alternative during the Republican primary that was a rational, smart, principle-based conservative. And every single one of you Never Trump conservatives attacked DeSantis as if he was Hitler 2.0 because you were terrified that you were going to lose Trump as your pinata. And so you decided you needed to go and destroy DeSantis too. If you were sincere about your opposition to Trump, you all would have jumped on the DeSantis bandwagon. The fact that you didn't proved you were a bunch of full of shit frauds. John, that DeSantis issue proved it.
And my only response again is, I'm sure there were plenty of Never Trumpers or principled conservatives who did go after DeSantis. I didn't.
Oh, baloney.
John, stop.
I guarantee you that's not true. I guarantee you. So you supported Ron DeSantis during the Republican primary, Joe, because you wanted a principled opposition to Donald Trump. Show me your tweet. John. Show me your tweet where you supported Ron DeSantis.
John. Again, I love you, brother, but listen, just please. On COVID, DeSantis handled it well, and I didn't attack him on COVID. I
But
didn't
did you support him in the Republican primary,
No,
Joe?
no, and let me answer
Why
that.
didn't you?
I'm
Because you're
going
not
to
a Republican anymore, Joe, because you
no,
knew that that would
no,
offend your liberal audience if you were a
John,
DeSantis supporter. So
John,
you had an alternative. You had an alternative to take Trump out, and you didn't take it because you're not really
John,
in this for principle.
John, stop for a moment. I love you, brother, but you have a terrible habit. I got some bad habits. You ask me a question, then you give the answer. You asked me why I wouldn't support a DeSantis, maybe even anybody else in that primary. The reason the red line I drew, feel free to disagree with it, is I said after 2020 that I can never support any Republican who supported Trump in 2020. If you're a Republican and you still supported him after 4 years of that guy in the White House, I'll never support you.
But Joe, you
So
voted for him
no,
in 2016.
John,
Joe,
no,
you
no,
voted for him in
John,
2016.
I did. And then John,
So you couldn't even support yourself for president then
no,
when you
John, you
ran.
didn't. Again, brother, you didn't listen. I said in 2020.
What was the difference?
I'll tell you what the difference was, my friends. My friend, 4 years of him as president. That helped wake me up to him. I didn't pay enough. I never watched The Apprentice. I didn't pay enough attention to him in 16. But if you watch this guy for 4 years in the White House and you still supported him, I could never support you. By the way, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger campaigned hard for Trump in 2020.
Because they're frauds.
Hold on.
They're frauds.
But what the point I'm making to you, if Liz Cheney ran for president, I could never support her because she supported Trump in 2020.
So what Republican could you have supported, Joe, in
Any
this theoretical world where somehow voting for him in 2016 is okay, but 2020, that one is a bridge too far?
Hey, John, hold on a minute. You don't see a difference in your view of Trump, like after watching him in the White House? Like, do you think there are people who can watch him as president and say, oh my God, this is bad? Like you see, there's 2016.
He was actually not quite as bad in his first term as I had feared. I mean, until COVID, when he got manipulated by Fauci and Newsom and Cuomo and a bunch of other liberals.
I think
then he was awful.
Yeah, for some of us, after seeing him as president, that was the wake-up call. Maybe and again, not yours because you opposed him from the beginning. I'm just telling you that's my red line. So that's my red line against DeSantis or anybody. I would support any Republican who didn't vote for him in 20 after his 4 years in the White House.
And who would that?
That's my answer.
That's a completely unrealistic standard.
No, John, there aren't many. I agree with that. You know that. I know that. The party is his. Who was it? Maybe Asa Hutchinson, I think, was the only one. I agree with you. There aren't many I could support. That's just my red line.
To me, that's a way out of getting a way of avoiding this issue, which I think is an important one. Where in 2024, you NeverTrump conservatives were provided with a viable alternative to Donald Trump, and instead of embracing that alternative on the Republican side, you proactively tried to destroy it because, frankly, you guys are loving that Donald Trump is back in the White House. You would be completely irrelevant if Trump had lost. NeverTrump conservatives would have nothing to do right now if Trump had lost. You're thrilled he's in the White House a second time.
John, do you love it that Trump's president again?
I am glad that Kamala Harris is not president.
Okay.
I am hopeful that somehow we're going to get through the next 4 years without a major crisis like we had with COVID, because I don't think Trump is well suited to that.
And all I can tell you is, again, you made a claim there against me, my good friend. I love it that Trump's president. Let me answer that. God, no.
What would you be talking about if Trump had lost?
You know what I'd be doing? I'd be talking about President Kamala Harris and criticizing her where I think she goes wrong on policy. That would be a lot of fun. I'd be talking about issues. John,
but you would no longer go on television because there's no need for a former Republican congressman who's devoted his life to criticizing Donald Trump.
You know what's interesting, John? I don't go on TV much anymore because CNN and others have made it clear that I don't fit their bucket. They want a Democratic critic of Trump and a Republican supporter of Trump. I don't fit either one of those buckets. But no, I can't speak, John, for other Never-Trumpers. Maybe there are other Never-Trumpers that love that he's president. John, I'm only speaking for myself, for the country, for everything. I'd go live in the middle of nowhere and never be heard from again if he hadn't won. In a heartbeat, man. What can I do? All I can do is tell you that, and you're going to shake your head and say, Joe,
let me put it this way. Joe, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on that, but the Lincoln Project guys are thrilled that Trump won again. Would you agree with that?
Here's John, here's how I'll answer it. I don't know. I'd love to ask them. I don't want to accuse any Never-Trumper of loving having him back in the White House for financial reasons or professional reasons. I can't speak for them. I'd love to ask them. I don't know. Do you know for a fact? Did they tell you that?
Well, they don't talk to me anymore, but I'm a pretty good judge of human behavior. And I am very confident that the Lincoln Project guys were thrilled when Trump won, because if Trump loses, they no longer have any relevance at all. And they have no way of fundraising anymore. Because no one cares about them.
I want to go back to this. I want to close with this. And again, I do not question your sincerity, because I know you took a hit. We've all taken a hit. And I think it's possible to be a conservative like you and not support, as much as you hate Trump, I'm not going to support the Democratic candidate. I disagree with that, but I respect it. I get it. Did you think please tell me you think it's possible to be another Never-Trumper and not be a sellout and not be a lib?
It's 100% possible. It's just apparently very difficult. I didn't realize how difficult it was. And look, it's possible that there are others like me. I mean, I'm not a prominent person, so I don't have as much to lose as other people who are much more prominent. I go on News Nation every once in a while, and I do my podcast and a few other things. But I'm not in the same situation that a lot of other people are. Like Glenn Beck, for instance. Let me use him as an example. I actually gave Glenn Beck a lot of slack when he started to turn towards Trump, because he had a lot of people relying on him for their jobs. And I understood that he made a decision to abandon principle and sell out to Trump to try to save the blaze. And by the way, it worked. So a lot of people's jobs were saved because Glenn Beck gave up his principles and decided to suck Trump's butt for a living, which he now does. And so, you know what? You got to do what you got to do. That's the world we live in. But for me, I'm not capable of doing that. It's not in my DNA. Well, I'm a truth teller, come hell or high water, whether that's pro-Trump or anti-Trump or somewhere in between.
And I believe that. You're a pain in the ass, but I believe that. You are a pain in the ass, but I've never doubted that about you. I'll close with this. And I know you doubted about me. I consider myself the same way. You and I were in a business, talk radio, where we got paid to say what we believed. I couldn't imagine not saying what I believe. Salem Communications pressured me every day to say good shit about Trump. I said, I can't do that. You and I know other people in that business who said, fuck it. I want to keep my job. I'm only going to say good things about Trump. I've taken an enormous hit. You've taken an enormous hit. I just think we're more alike than you think. I'll close with that, but I'll give you the final word.
Joe, I actually don't necessarily disagree with that. I actually think part of the reason why you asked me on this show is because you have a little bit of a conscience problem. I think that there's I believe that you have a conscience issue, that you yourself are uncomfortable with some of the positions that you have taken.
You know what we're going to do? Ziegler, you so piss me off. We're going to have a part 2 to this because I haven't changed my positions.
Okay. Well, I was actually giving you some credit. Joe, I was going to give you some credit for being different than what I consider to be the hardcore Lincoln Project, Never Trump, so-called Republican base. And the difference is you have a conscience. And I applaud you for having a conscience. And I think that I was playing the part of your conscience and coming on this podcast today. And I hope I helped you in some way.
Well, I had you on because I know this has been eaten at you, and I wanted to understand what your beef was.
Do you understand me better now?
Hold on. Yes. I wanted to understand what your beef was with me and generally the movement. And this has been really helpful. And
Good.
I really would love to have a part two, because I have not changed my position. Hey, everybody, follow John Ziegler. Again, follow him on Twitter at Zigman Freud, at Zigman Freud. Check out his podcast, Death of Journalism Podcast. A good, principled conservative. John, thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Be brave, everybody. Be brave.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract.